Welcome to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is Eldad Moraru of Long & Foster, who's been helping families for over 10 years in this area find the right home. Thanks so much for being here, Eldad.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, in addition to TV, you have a radio show once a week, right?
I appear on WTOP every other Sunday, where we talk about real estate, Sunday mornings.
Okay. So, hopefully you're up on all these trends, because I have to ask you a few questions.
I live it every day.
Okay. So, I'm hearing about these multiple offers. There's this one house on Capitol Hill that had over 100 bids. That's my understanding. Did you hear about that?
165 offers, actually, and mine was one of them.
Okay.
We didn't win, but we were in the mix there.
So is that what people can expect, that they're going to put their house on the market and have these multiple offers?
You know, that is the expectation by a lot of sellers, which is actually inaccurate. The media loves these stories. I mean, 165 offers, and that's an anomaly. That's so not the norm. That's probably the only property I've heard of this happening to in years.
Okay.
So the reality is it's the exception, not the rule. It does happen. It's happening more than it's been happening the last few years.
Right.
But it's certainly not something a seller should be expecting.
Okay.
But it can happen, and it is happening.
Okay. So would you say that the market is definitely picking up?
The market is absolutely picked up. It's much more in the favor of sellers right now, which is making it tough for buyers, a little frustrating. Sellers can do a lot to try to position themselves to get their home sold quickly and maybe even generate multiple offers. You don't want to go in with that mindset, but you want to do all the right things to give yourself the best opportunity for that to happen.
So what kind of things would you recommend a seller would do to make a house move quickly?
That's a great question. First of all, the house has to show incredibly well. So it has to be pristine. All the staging things that we've talked about in the past on a lot of shows where the house has to look great, has to be decluttered, has to show well. But key to all this is pricing. And the tendency over the last few years is for sellers to say, you know what, let me price a little bit higher because I'm a little nervous about the market, so I have room to negotiate down. And a lot of times that's a mistake. Because buyers right now, because they're so educated, they really know what the right price is for the right house.
Okay.
So if you price it right, buyers will know that. And even if you price a little low, buyers will know that. And you want to have that situation where a buyer walks in, says, wow, this house is incredible, it's priced right, and they're nervous about that house disappearing quickly, and they make offers on the spot. If you generate that kind of aura about the house, it's going to go quick, and sometimes maybe even go above asking.
Wow. So have you had a situation where, people need help decluttering, like they're not going to be able to do it on their own, or there's just, the basement is just, you can't even walk. There's almost a hoarder situation.
Right.
And what do you do when you see that?
Personally, I've seen that from the whole gamut to where I did an estate sale for this law firm, and a hoarder did live there. And I've got different professionals who can help depending on the level of the situation of the property. So in that situation, we actually had to bring a trash removal company.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, they quoted 5 truckloads. It actually took 8 truckloads because once they pulled out the first 5 truckloads, there was even more that they didn't see. It's usually not that extreme, but I had a situation where I sold a property for an older lady who certainly was not going to declutter the house herself, so we brought in a few people who she paid by the hour, who under her direction boxed things up, put stuff in storage. So there's all sorts of different things we can do to assist clients in doing that.
Okay, no, that makes sense, because I think some people will need help.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So have you dealt with, in your own situation or with clients when they're trying to sell their parents' homes? Because I think that's very tricky. I have.
Unfortunately, both my parents passed away last year, and within 4 months of each other. So after my mom passed away, and she passed away first, we were starting to think about it. And when I say we, it's me and my sister. My parents lived in New York, which is where my sister still lives.
Okay.
So the two of us were trying to think about what's next for my dad, because they lived in a single-family home with steps, which was becoming more and more difficult for them.
Right.
We didn't really have time to get to the point of, hey, Dad, what are we going to do next? But after he passed away, we did have to deal with getting his home sold, which we did. Actually, we settled on it 3 weeks ago. I was in the interesting position of actually having to interview and hire a real estate agent up there. Obviously, A, I'm not licensed there, B,
right.
I wouldn't have done that anyway. So it was interesting to be in the position of a seller, to go through that, but also having to deal with all that comes along with selling the house you grew up in,
right.
and then your parents' home, and all that comes with that.
So I imagine that's going to take a little more time, right? Because you have to go through all the family heirlooms, figure out how you're going to divide them. It's not so easy.
It's not easy. There were two dynamics going on. One is that I was advised, and with doing a little research because of what I do, I did realize that the market in New York is as active as it is here. So the time was right to put it on very quickly, but I had to juggle that with, okay, we need to get in the house, go through everything, decide what we want, what needs to go. Unfortunately for my sister, because she was local, a lot of it fell on her more so than me. I took a couple of trips up,
right.
but she was really the feet on the street day to day dealing with this. And, it's tough. For me personally, all I really wanted were sentimental things. I wasn't interested in the couch and the TV stand, just things that had meaning to me. And that's not easy, but it has to be done. So we did it, and we got the house on relatively quickly.
So what happens with things that people don't want, like the couch or dining room
That was
set?
actually very frustrating because New York dealt with Sandy, right? And there's a lot of people over there who we felt could use this stuff.
Right.
And you'd be amazed how many of these charities had zero interest in taking them. So, perfectly good couches and dining room tables and things like that. And they came by, and my sister called on several of those charities, and they came by, they looked, said, no thanks. So it's actually kind of sad. A lot of the things that we thought had a value to somebody,
right.
we actually threw away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because we could have done a yard sale and all that, but with everything else that we had, especially my sister had to deal with, the estate and all the other stuff that had nothing to do with the house,
right.
There wasn't the time or the emotional strength to deal with all that. So unfortunately, a lot of the stuff got wasted, really.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
But speaking of the estate, so do you have to go through the estate process first to get like a order from the court that then allows you to list the house?
Well, actually, in our situation, normally yes.
Okay.
But in our situation, after my mother passed, my father transferred the house into a trust in the name of my sister and I. So we technically owned the house.
Okay.
So we were the sellers. So we didn't have to deal with all that. That was good planning on his part.
Yeah, no, because I'm imagining as an agent, some people may call you and say, I need to sell my parents' house, but you have to deal with the person who has the title.
Exactly. So it depends on the situation. If the parents are still alive, that's one thing. If they've passed, hopefully they've done all the things they need to do. If they haven't, we typically have to get an attorney involved who will, do what needs to be done to set things up appropriately. Yeah.
So what do you think is a reasonable time frame for something like, a parent either needs to go to a nursing home facility because they've suffered a stroke or whatever, or there's a death in the family.
Right.
From between when that incident happens, the trigger point, to the point where they're able to contact you, how long should they wait?
I will tell you, it really varies on the situation. I've seen, because I do work with estate attorneys, and I've seen situations where we've gotten everything done and the house is on the market within a month, to situations where it's taken a year. They've reached out to me,
oh, wow.
and they've said, look, we're going to need to sell this house, and I'm thinking, okay, within 2 months this is going to be on the market. A year later, we're finally getting on the market. So It depends, because some situations some are very messy, some are not. It really depends, case by case. So I would say, if you're already thinking about it, get started sooner rather than later.
And how would somebody, because I'm imagining it's going to be very tricky, how would somebody find the right agent that they're going to be able to work with?
When you're talking to agents, ask them if they've dealt with this before. Some agents have never, ever done a transaction of an estate or dealing with an elderly parent, and some, like myself, I've done a whole bunch of them. So it depends.
Okay, so that's a legitimate question to ask.
It's an absolutely legitimate question to ask. If you ask the question and they have no idea what you're talking about, it's probably a good sign that they might not be the right person. But oftentimes, if they've been there, they will not only answer your question, but probably tell you questions you should be asking that you didn't even think about. And that leads you to understand that they probably know more about the topic than you do, which is what you want.
Right. So in terms of, sort of plotting out the process, so let's say you have a parent that is showing signs of dementia, right? That's already a problem because you need to make sure that they're able to sign paperwork while they're still lucid.
Right.
Right. But then they would, they would presumably interview a couple of agents and say, what do you think this house is worth, right? And what do you think I could list it for? What do you think I should do to fix it up?
Right.
Right. So how do you guys determine what the right price should be?
Well, we do what's called a CMA, a competitive market analysis, and typically it's based on historical data and hopefully very recent data of what is sold within the neighborhood of similar properties in similar condition.
Okay.
Now that actually gives you what we call the fair market value of the property. So it gives you a range. Typically, let's say, a single family home somewhere in Montgomery County, and it's somewhere in the $650,000 range. So usually you would get a sense of this home is probably worth somewhere between $650,000 and $700,000, let's say. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to put it on the market for.
Okay.
Okay, because when you put it on the market, there's also something called positioning.
What is that?
So what does that mean? Well, you look at when you buy a car, right? There's certain cars that are always competing for each other, right? And they're all priced within a certain range of each other.
Right.
So you look at, okay, today there are 15 similar homes in this zip code or this neighborhood or this subdivision that are like this house. How are they priced?
And
that becomes critical because what's going to happen is the buyers are going to look at all 15 houses. Now, if you're $50,000 higher than an identical home, why would they buy yours? You're probably going to help sell the other house. Now, if you're less expensive than those other homes, by let's say even $4,000, there's a very good chance they're going to go for your house first. So you can't price in a vacuum. Just because, okay, your home is worth between $650,000 and $700,000 doesn't mean that's the right price today. Now, that might be very different in 3 months when there's only 3 houses on the market or maybe 50 houses on the market. You've got to look at the competition when you're deciding how to price.
And as an agent, you're allowed to actually go in and view these other...
Oh, absolutely. And if you're active in that market, you've probably already been there. Even if you aren't interviewing to put this particular house on the market, you've probably already seen the inventory and are familiar with it.
Okay, so then that would help you explain to the seller, well, that house, which you may think is similar, has these extra things like this, beautiful deck or a brand new kitchen, right? So you're able to then
exactly, and also looking historically, if a house is already sold, you can't get into it to look at it. So that's where the value is. You know what? I did see that house. Like you talked about that house that had 165 offers.
Yeah.
I've been in that house, so I can tell you all about it.
Right.
So if we're looking at that house 4 doors down that sold for $800,000, I'm telling you your house is worth $700,000, and you're wondering why.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because that had a brand new kitchen, a finished basement, an addition, and you don't have a redone kitchen. Your basement's not finished, and it's the original size. Well, there you go. So that's important stuff to know. That just looking at paper isn't going to tell you, or online. That's critical information.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and then we will be right back.
I'm home, and I love it. I'm home, where I belong.
It's always nice to come home, but many Americans are at risk of foreclosure and losing their homes. Making home affordable from the U.S. government has already helped over 1 million struggling homeowners like these. The sooner you act, the better chance we can help you.
I'm home, where I belong.
Welcome back to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is Eldad Moraru from Long & Foster, and we're talking about selling your parents' home. Thanks so much for being here, Eldad.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I have to ask you, I think there might be some ambiguity about who's supposed to check on the home on a regular basis, right? Like if you're selling my mom's house and I'm like, okay, great.
And it's vacant.
And it's vacant because she's already somewhere else. She's moved to Florida, right? Is it my responsibility to go check on it regularly, or is it your responsibility?
Well, technically it's not one person or the other. There's no like, this is always how it's done, but it's probably good to have an agreement or an understanding that, okay, I'm as your agent, I'll stop by once a day, twice a week, whatever it is. Or, I mean, look, if you live 2 houses down, probably pretty easy for you to stop there every single day, but a lot of times the kids are out of state and there's no one to look, but you definitely want to get on the same page there.
Right. And what's the risk of not going to check on a regular basis?
Well, the risk is that stuff happens to, or can happen to houses. We have storms, rainstorms, snowstorms, pipes can burst, basements can flood. You know, I had a situation where I was actually representing a buyer, and there was a vacant home in Northwest D.C. that I had under contract with buyers. We did the home inspection, and my buyers decided to void the contract. It was a fixer-upper. The house was vacant. So I actually called an investor client of mine as soon as I knew that these buyers decided they were going to walk on the property. And I thought, you know what, this property is perfect for this other buyer. I said, meet me there today at 4 o'clock. And I'd been in the house 3 days earlier.
Right.
I show up. I got there 10 minutes before he did. I decided, let's unlock the door, go in, and, you know, just turn the lights on and get the house ready.
Right.
I opened the door. I heard what sounded like a waterfall. Turns out there was a pipe had burst in the toilet on the 2nd floor.
Oh, wow.
And it had probably been running for at least a day because the ceiling in the kitchen had caved in, and the basement had, I don't know, what is that, like 4 inches of water, extensive damage to the house. And when I checked in a couple of days, of course, first thing I did was call the listing agent, and they got on top of it. But, I mean, that's a nightmare scenario. Usually stuff like that does not happen, but it can. So a vacant home should not be left alone unattended for extended periods of time.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I could see that. So I also want to talk to you about like the emotional side of, you know, when a parent isn't ready to actually vacate.
Right.
Do you see there's resistance, and what do you think that a child can do to sort of prepare their parent, make it smoother?
That is actually probably one of the toughest things about selling a parent's home who's still alive, still got their faculties, and they don't want to move. Sometimes they're ready and they're out of there. But what I have seen from my experience is that trying to go down the road of this house is too big for you, there's too many stairs, kind of focusing on the negative things, a lot of times doesn't work. What I've had some success with is taking a different route, taking the parent and the child, adult child typically, right, to go see new options, whether it is a nursing home or assisted living, or maybe they're not ready for that, condos, single-level homes, and try to get them excited. I've had a lot of sellers who've sold that big house and moved into condos in downtown where, you know, they're still able to walk to things, and all of a sudden they see like, wow, I can walk to all these restaurants or what have you. But the idea is, let's try to get them excited about what they can do next and not focus about what the negatives are of where they are. And a lot of times that is what kind of turns the key and gets them to agree to move. And I've had situations where they've done that and they have been thrilled with the outcome. Okay. So that's one approach you can try. It doesn't always work, but it can be very effective.
Well, yeah, I mean, but if you're going to go down a path, you'd rather know, like, okay, I'm at point A now, but where's point B? Right?
Exactly.
It's the fear of the unknown that really freaks most people out.
Right.
If you know what point B is, like, okay.
It reduces the stress and the fear of the, like as you said, of the unknown.
Right. So switching a little bit, like, let's say they are buying a condo, right, with the parents involved. I mean, my understanding is inventory is very low these days.
It is, right. So what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, you know, buying real estate is really a process of elimination. A lot of people think that, okay, I'm just going to create this list in my mind of this is what I want, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to find it. More often than not, unless you, and even, I was going to say, even in situations where there's an unlimited budget, even in those situations, you don't always get what you want. So you've got to make a list of what's important to you and then go look. Because more often than not, it's going to be where you're going to have to give up on certain things. So oftentimes it's, I can get exactly what I want, but not in the exact location I wanted, or be in the location I want, but settle for something maybe a little less. So what happens is that, and it's different for everybody, what is important to you? And that's where you say, okay, you know what, I'd rather have the smaller place in the neighborhood I want to be, and that's what you're going to end up with, or vice versa. Now, with inventory being this low, what you got to do is get out there, look at as many properties as you can, and assess. Because usually, once you go out, you start getting a real sense of what your budget will buy you.
Okay.
And that's the challenge, because a lot of times people are looking online, and they think like, okay, whatever the number is, $500,000, whatever it is, I'm going to be able to get A, B, and C. When they go out there and look, they realize, you know what, that's not actually the case.
Right.
So the key is to get yourself educated as quickly as possible, because when you do find the right property, right now anyway, it's probably going to be gone, and it's going to be gone quick. So there's no time for, well, let me think about it, let me sleep on it, give me the weekend. If you see the right property, you pretty much have to make a decision almost on the spot and act quickly. So the only way you're going to be able to do that is be educated and be ready, which means having your financing ready to go.
I was going to ask you that next. So you're saying people should already talk to a lender and have
Absolutely.
an idea?
Unless you're paying cash. If you're getting a mortgage, that needs to be done, which means doing your due diligence, not just getting pre-approved for a loan, but also what does that translate to in a monthly payment? Because most people have a budget that they want to stay under. And even
especially for a retired person.
Especially for a retired person. And yes, if you don't have income coming in, it's harder to qualify. So you got to. A lot of times, people feel like, well, right now I used to have a mortgage of X. I should be able to get that again. That might not be the case. You might be able to get a lot more, or a lot less, and until you talk to a lender, you don't know. So you've got to get that completely ironed out. And when you look at the monthly, because people, there's price and then there's the monthly payment, right? And those are two completely different things. So maybe you qualify for that $500,000 mortgage, but then you look at the monthly payment and you say, I don't want to spend that per month.
Right, because you have to tack on insurance, taxes.
Exactly,
and
if it's a condo fee.
Which I have to tell you, I went with a friend who's looking for a condo in Virginia, and her condo fee was over $500.
Okay.
And it didn't include utilities. So what is the range for? I was shocked.
Oh, there is no range. It can range from $200 to $1,500.
$1,500.
Yeah, there's certain co-ops, but co-ops are different because they also include your taxes. It depends. It also depends on the size of the unit. Usually the square footage, which determines the percentage of the common elements that you own, will dictate what your condo fee will be. So the ranges are all over the map. You need to look at not just what is the condo fee, because a lot of times the price will reflect the condo fee.
Right, like I understand if you have an elevator, a pool, a gym, one of those lounge areas that you can reserve, that's all going to add on to your
That's going to add, but also the health of the condo association. A lot of people don't realize that. And what I mean by that is, condo associations have budgets.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
Their annual budgets. They also have what are called reserves, which is essentially cash in the bank for a rainy day to take care of.
The roof caves in.
Yeah, let's say something unexpected happens, and the association has $5,000 in the bank. That's very different than an association that has $500,000 in the bank. That's important to know, because once you're part of that building, you're part of the association, and the health of that association and of that building is, you own it. It's part of your situation.
So the children that are helping their parents look at condos really need to pay attention to those condo docs.
Exactly, exactly. So when you're under contract, the seller is obligated to give you those condo docs, and you have a certain period of time to review them.
3 days, right?
It's different. DC is 3 business days. Maryland's different. Virginia is different. So you make sure you pay attention to what jurisdiction you're in and how much time you have. Because during that time period, you can void for any reason. You can be reasons outside of the condo docs. Even getting cold feet.
I see. Right.
Technically speaking. But look very carefully. What does that budget look like? How healthy is the association? Are there planned special assessments? And you can call.
Oh, so it'll tell you whether there's a special
assessment. It could. It might not. It depends where they are. But it doesn't hurt to call the condo association president, maybe, and ask some questions. Or normally, depending on if it's a bigger building, there's a professional property management company that manages the building.
Right.
Call the property manager, that man or woman who's day in, day out dealing with that building, and ask the questions. I've had situations where, clients have their 60-pound dog, and only when they were under contract realized that the building didn't allow pets. They never told me that having to be pet-friendly was critical.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they found out, they don't allow pets.
Right.
I could have told you that. So, that's important stuff. You don't want to move in, and on the moving day, and all of a sudden your neighbor says, I'm sorry, that dog can't come in here. And what do you do then? I mean, that's extreme. That's
Right.
shouldn't happen, but you got to think about those things.
The other thing that I've heard, I'm not sure if you've heard this as well, is that certain lenders, depending on the ratio of owners to renters in a condo, they won't give you a loan because there's too many renters. Have you heard that?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
There's different types of programs, right? So you might be using an FHA loan.
Right.
If you are a buyer buying with an FHA loan, the building has to be FHA approved. So you need to find that ahead of time, because to go through the FHA approval process is not a quick thing.
Okay.
That's number one. But you might even be doing a conventional loan. If there are too many investors in the building, a bank will not lend on that under certain criteria. So you might be all of a sudden required to put much more cash down. And if, let's say, you can only put 10% down, and now the lender says you need to put 25% down,
well, that's a big
that's not an option for you, right? And also, investors can't buy in every building, because
Really?
they also, a lot of times there's restrictions as to how many investor properties can be, units can be in the building, can be rented out.
Right.
And if they're already at capacity, even if you're paying all cash, they could keep you from renting out. So there's a lot of due diligence, especially with condos, you need to do ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm focusing on condos is just for elderly people. I'm assuming that they want an elevator-friendly,
Right.
place where the maintenance is taken care of by somebody else that does the landscaping.
Right.
But I mean, now I'm hearing all these things, thinking like, I don't know that that's necessarily the best fit. I mean, they have to be careful.
They have to be careful. They have to do a lot of due diligence up front. Mm-hmm. Also helps to work with an agent who's done a lot of business with condos and understands all this.
Right.
Because condo buyers I have, a lot of times, they send me the list of the condos they like. I make the phone calls before we go, because there's no point in driving out to see a building that you then find out they will never get a loan for.
Right.
So why waste time? Go, and then they fall in love with the building, and then they can't buy there. So it definitely helps to work with an agent who's intimately familiar with all the rules and regulations that the lenders require for condo buildings. And not all realtors think about that. They just kind of leave it on the lender and say, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Right.
But you're going to waste a lot of time if you don't know that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any final tips?
Final tips for elderly buyers
Right.
and sellers? You got to keep an open mind. And I know it can be a very scary process. And I've been on both sides of the fence, working with my parents and
Right.
with clients. I think the advice I would give is for the children of those elderly parents, easier said than done. Exercise a lot of patience, because it can be very frustrating and it's very emotional for the kids.
Sure.
If you can try to mask a little bit of that emotion, it helps the parents, because a lot of times the parents are more concerned about the kids than they are about themselves. So a lot of the resistance sometimes comes about like, well, I don't want to cause too many issues for my kids. I want to make this easy. So if you can sort of take a deep breath and relax, a lot of times it can really help the process along.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, again, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And if people wanted to contact you, what's the best way to reach you?
They can go to my website, eldadmoraru.com, eldadmoraru.com, and all my contact information is there, cell phone, email, however they want to reach me.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Making It Last.